My name is Bethany. I'm 27 years old, and my life has always been a struggle. My mother is sick and needs expensive medical care that drains every penny I earn. I work 2 jobs just to keep us afloat, and exhaustion has become my constant companion. One evening, a friend dragged me to a party in a mansion I could never afford to enter otherwise. Everyone there wore designer clothes and spoke casually about luxury. That's where I first saw Ronald Harper. He stood across the room in a perfectly tailored suit, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. I couldn't understand why someone like him would notice someone like me. But when the party ended, rain poured outside. I had no umbrella and no money for a taxi. Ronald approached me and offered me a ride. I hesitated, but the rain was relentless, so I accepted. Inside his expensive car, he asked if I was hungry and drove me to an elegant restaurant where I felt completely out of place. He barely spoke during dinner, but his cold eyes never left my face. Finally, he leaned forward and said something that changed everything. He told me he saw how hard my life was and that he could help. He was rich and alone, and he wanted companionship. In exchange, he would give me money, enough to cover my mother's medical bills and free me from my exhausting jobs. His offer felt wrong. Yet the thought of my mother's suffering and my endless struggles made me consider it. After a long silence, I said yes. My life transformed overnight. Suddenly, I lived in a world of private planes, luxury hotels, expensive clothes, and sparkling jewelry. Ronald gave me everything money could buy, but he also gave me rules. He told me clearly that this arrangement was not about love. I was to be loyal, never ask about his business, and keep our relationship private. He handed me a contract that outlined everything, including monthly payments in exchange for my companionship. I signed it, feeling like I had sold a piece of myself, but I told myself it was for my mother. Living with Ronald was lonely. He was quiet and distant, showing little emotion. Sometimes he was kind, but mostly he remained a mystery. His enormous house felt more like a beautiful prison than a home. I had everything I needed, yet I felt trapped. One afternoon, I wandered into his study and saw a photograph on his desk. It showed a stunning woman I had never seen before. When I asked Ronald about her, his expression turned ice. He dismissed my question, opened a drawer, and hid the photo away. His reaction told me he was hiding something important. The housekeeper, Mrs. Conway, had worked for Ronald for years. One day, she pulled me aside and whispered a warning. She told me to be careful, that Ronald had many secrets, and that nothing in this house was as it seemed. Her words filled me with dread. That same night, Ronald approached me with a strange request. He needed to get married, not for love, but for business purposes. A marriage on paper would help him close an important deal. He promised nothing between us would change. I would continue living with him, receiving money, but I would be his wife in name only. Despite my doubts, I agreed. The wedding was small and joyless. Only a lawyer and Mrs. Conway attended. I wore a white dress, but I felt nothing like a bride. It was just another contract, another chain binding me to Ronald. After the wedding, I accompanied him to business events where people stared at us, the young wife and the powerful businessman. I smiled for the cameras, but inside I felt empty and alone. One day I brought lunch to Ronald's office and heard a woman screaming inside. She was furious, shouting that Ronald had promised to marry her. When she saw me, she pointed at me and accused me of stealing her life. Her name was Nancy, and she claimed Ronald had been with her for years before abandoning her for me. I realized then that Ronald had lied. Our marriage wasn't just for business. He had promised Nancy a real marriage, and he had broken that promise. Later, I discovered messages on his phone from other women. He was still seeing people behind my back. I couldn't live in ignorance anymore. I hired a private investigator and used Ronald's money to uncover his secrets. What I learned shocked me. Ronald's wealth came from illegal business deals. He laundered money through shell companies and used different identities to hide his crimes. He used women like me as part of his schemes. But the investigator also discovered something Ronald hadn't told me. When we married, he had transferred ownership of one of his major companies into my name, probably planning to take it back later. But legally, it was mine, and he couldn't reclaim it without my consent. I realized Ronald had made a terrible mistake. He thought I was just a naive, desperate woman he could control. But now I had power. I decided to play his game. In public, I became the perfect wife, smiling and affectionate. Ronald was pleased, thinking I had finally submitted completely. But privately, I studied his business, consulted experts, and built my own plan. A year after our wedding, on our anniversary, Ronald came home expecting celebration. Instead, I confronted him. I told him I knew about Nancy, about the other women, about his illegal businesses, and about the company he had foolishly put in my name. His face turned red with rage. He demanded to know how I had learned these things. I calmly placed divorce papers on the table and told him I was leaving and keeping the company. He shouted that I was nothing, that he had given me everything. I corrected him. He had given me money, and I had used it to educate myself and take control. He realized I was right. The law was on my side. Without another word, I walked out of his mansion. I left behind all the expensive clothes and jewelry he had bought me. I didn't need any of it. What I took with me was far more valuable: my freedom, my power, and a company that would secure my future and my mother's care. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt strong. I had entered Ronald's world as a desperate, tired woman, but I was leaving as someone who had learned to fight for herself. I had taken back control of my life, and I would never let anyone trap me again.